faces. As a member of the planning committee, I'm thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker as we kick things off. Dr. Todd Whitaker is one of the nation's leading authorities on staff motivation, teacher leadership, and principal effectiveness. He's written more than 60 books, including the national bestseller, What Great Teachers Do Differently. He's also the author of two of my personal favorites, Shifting the Monkey and What Great Principals Do Differently. He currently teaches at the University of Missouri in Columbia after a long and distinguished career at Indiana State University. Personally, I've known Todd for several years now. He's been a guest on my Reimagine Schools podcast, for those of you that listen to that. He's even popped into some of my online courses at Georgetown College. So it doesn't matter if he's speaking to a room full of thousands of educators at a conference or just a handful of students in a Zoom session. Todd Whitaker is always dedicated to helping school leaders discover their full potential. So a big thanks to Todd for all he does for Kentucky principals and educators. And despite being a diehard Missouri Tigers fan, and I just learned this morning he's also a big Hallmark movie fan, but despite those things, I'm glad to call him a friend and a mentor. And Todd, I hope really the Kentucky Wildcats can get one back from you guys when Mizzou comes to Rupp Arena. So let's give a big blue welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Todd Whitaker.
Well, thank you. I am very excited and honored and looking forward to having a chance to work with you all. It's truly a blessing. One of the things I put in the chat box, and if people could make sure their chat's open, because we'll probably use it in some interactive ways here. If in the chat, you could list what you do, where you're at, and your rally song. So kind of what song gets you juiced up there. And I was going to put anything by Meghan Trainor, but I wasn't sure how to spell Meghan Trainor. So anyhow, we're going to go ahead and leave that there at this point. I also like Moves Like Jagger. I like Blurred Lines. I don't think you're allowed to say that, but lots of other things too. So I'm a big music guy. I just saw Kenny Loggins, I think, is going to be on a farewell tour this year. If they call, and I mean it, he called it This Is It. I just saw it. I follow him on social media, and I'm a big Kenny Loggins fan, if anybody knows who Kenny Loggins is. So that's kind of exciting there. And along those lines, when we're thinking of the music thing, a guy goes into a job interview. The guy interviewing him says, "Can you perform under pressure?" And he goes, "No, but I can do Bohemian Rhapsody." Anyhow, if you're over a certain age and like music, that's a really funny joke right there. But otherwise, we're on our own. So, but it is a treat to have a chance to work with you. I had the good fortune of being in Hazard last Thursday and worked with a group of outstanding educators there. And so it's always a blessing to connect with the Commonwealth of Kentucky and have a chance to work with you and go from there. I love the EdCamp thing. It's really nice that it's on Zoom. One thing I always remind my friends on Zoom is, please remember the camera adds 10 pounds and I've got like 9 cameras on me. So if you could do the math, that would be helpful as we go along here. The one blessing of Zoom. The one blessing is my personality is so annoying. It comes across exactly the same on Zoom as it does in person. And so you don't gain anything, you don't lose anything. And so, but you can mute me, and in person, that's a lot harder thing to do. So it is a treat to be here, and I appreciate you all taking time to do this. You know, one of the things that we've learned in education is education leaders have shown the world how to lead. Education leaders have taken responsibility. Most leaders avoid responsibility. You know, it's really funny. We talk about first responders, and I appreciate all they do, but kind of all the principals and teachers in schools have been first responders the last few years. And we need to remember that. And that's one of the reasons it's hard. It's difficult. One of the other things I want us to do, and you may have heard me, and I apologize if you've heard me in the conference recently, and you know the jokes aren't any funnier, but one of the things I want us to remember is the fact that what we do really makes a difference. And the pandemic has proven that without a fact. And that's really important. We have verifiable fact that education makes a difference. You know, it's really interesting. If in the last couple of years your test scores have fallen, I want you to quit being defensive about it. Knock it off. If your test scores fell, what does that show you? What does that show? It shows that you really matter. You really make a difference. You know what should scare you? If the last 2 years your test scores have skyrocketed, that should be a concern. And instead we have proof that it has. And the thing we also know, and it shows the wide impact of education, not only have math scores suffered, not only have language arts scores suffered, so has student behavior. So has their ability to get along. So has their ability to interact with each other. That shows how much we need schools. And don't ever lose sight of that. It's a significant thing. Wear it as a point of pride, how unbelievably important that we are. Because other things happen. You know, it's funny, I live in Columbia, Missouri, and we have banks and they have branches, and the bank branches closed during the pandemic. And you know what's weird? They've never reopened because we don't need them. We have proof we don't need them. Because during the pandemic, and I know lots of people had always been doing banking virtually, taking pictures of your check, doing direct deposit and that kind of stuff. But during the pandemic, you got forced in that direction. And what happens is they've never reopened because we don't need them. A friend of mine owns an insurance agency, one of the major insurance agencies. Probably all your towns, communities, or in your regions have them, this particular company. And what's interesting is during the pandemic, he closed for like 2 months or 3 months, like everybody else did. When he reopened, it was 7 months before anybody came into his office. And you know what he realized? They don't need me. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Everything's online. Everything's distant. And when the headquarters realizes this, they're going to close all the offices in the country. They are, because nobody needs them. He's had his office open for 28 years. He had a customer that he's had for 26 years have their first claim ever just a couple of weeks ago. 26 years, they've never had a claim. They contact him. They come into the office, and you know what he told them to do? Call a 1-800 number. But we tried to close schools, and you know what it turns out? We really need schools. Okay, give me a wire and end. Anybody know anybody who says who says anyone can teach? Anybody ever met anybody who says anyone can teach? Give me a wire and end in the chat box there. Anybody ever met anyone who says everyone can teach? Anyone can teach? Yeah, you know what I tell them? You got your chance during the pandemic, genius boy. How'd that work out for you? Because see, they can't all teach. And what I think is funny is the people who are mad schools were closed also say anyone can teach, and I tell them pick a team. If anyone can teach, you shouldn't be mad the schools are closed. But it turns out anyone can't teach. It's really hard. It's really difficult. It's really a challenge. And I realize now why people are critical of educators. I really do. I think the biggest reason is they're jealous. They're jealous of teachers. You know how come? Because their jobs don't matter, and they know their jobs don't matter. They know nobody cares. They know it doesn't matter. Nobody ever comes to average people. No one ever comes to average people and say, you changed my life 11 years ago. Thank you so much for what happened. Nobody recalls different events that have taken place, but they do with teachers. They do in schools. And I want you to remind your school teachers of that every day. The last thing I want to share with you is, you'll probably all know this stuff. They have a Gallup poll every year, and they've done it, I think, for 39 years. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I could easily be incorrect. They've got the Gallup poll. I think it's been for 39 years. And there's two main questions that get reported every year. And I think it came out this year, September 1st. If not, it was at the beginning of September. And there's two main questions that get asked every year. One question is, how do you rate your local schools? One question is, how do you rate schools in general? And you all probably knew this, but did you know this year was the largest increase ever in how you rate your local schools? Didn't know if y'all knew that or not. The largest increase ever in how people rate their local schools was this year. And it's because they got to see how valuable they are, how important they are, and how much they miss them. And you want to know about the demonization of teachers in education? The view of how our schools in general fell more than it's ever fallen in any one year. And isn't that the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen? That shows the demonization, is the fact that we're just criticizing schools. Anybody ever heard of schools having kitty litter? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. And you know which schools have it? The neighboring schools. Never ours, the neighboring schools. But you know what? I just happened to talk to a group of legislators, and you know what I told them? No school in your state has kitty litter. They go, how do you know that? And I go, because some idiots would be broadcasting from outside the school if they had kitty litter. And since they're not there, apparently no one has it. And remind your teachers of how important they are, how significant they are. And the pandemic has said that. Also, remember, our job is not to reflect society. Our job is to cultivate society. When we don't have schools, you see what happens to society. We take back steps. Whatever your schools are like now, that's what your community is going to be like in 5 years. And that's how important we are. And please remind your teachers, and remember that you all are the ones that are leading that. It's so special. You know, what is it? A ship in port is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. And that's not what leaders are built for. You know, anybody can teach the valedictorian. But sometimes, you know, it is more fun to mow where the grass is long. And we have that opportunity every single day. And, you know, it was hard to come back after Christmas vacation, wasn't it? Wasn't that a hard thing to come back to work? You know what would have really been hard? If you had to come back to a job that didn't make any difference. That would have really been hard because you also left that job and you know it doesn't make a difference. And that's so important. Okay. So let's keep this in mind. We're going to talk about what it is great principals do differently. And I just want to do a little framing here for us and see if this makes any sense or not. I'm guessing 2 years, give me a wiring in on this. I'm guessing 2 years ago in March, y'all went virtual overnight. Is that correct? Give me a wiring in a chat box if you could do that. Okay. And how many of you already have at least a couple rally songs playing in your head that you saw in the chat box there? So anyhow, I got Party in the USA going. We went virtual overnight. And what made it so hard was you didn't have a dress rehearsal. You just went to opening night. You know, if we could have practiced for a week, it would have been dramatically different. But what happened is nobody had any chance to prepare. But I have a question for you. Give me a wiring in the chat box here. You went with no practice whatsoever, but how many of you could name 3 teachers in your school you knew were going to figure it out? Give me a wiring in. How many of you could name 3 teachers in your school you knew could figure it out? Okay. Give me a wiring in. How many of you could name 3 teachers in your school you knew were never going to figure it out? And give me a wiring in on this. How many of you knew the 3 teachers that could never figure it out? When we've come back in person, we realize they've never figured that out either. And you know how come? Because it's the exact same skill set. We always think everything's a different skill set. Everything's exactly the same skill set. And you know what makes great teachers so great? Their willingness to be vulnerable, their willingness to learn from others, their willingness to ask questions, their willingness to learn from people better than them. That doesn't mean they're better teachers than them, but they have a particular skill they're better than. Their willingness to learn from students. You know, I used to play tennis all the time. I don't know if anybody knew this, it's incidental. I used to play tennis all the time, like years ago, and I wanted to be really good at tennis. Like that's what I wanted to do, try to do for a living, is play tennis. And it's kind of interesting because if you play tennis, you know what you do in the off season? You play tennis. It's really a weird thing. That's all you do. You just play tennis. And it's different. Like football, think about the off season in football. Nobody plays football in the off season in football. Nobody even touches a football unless they're a skill position, a quarterback, a receiver, maybe a running back type thing. But otherwise, what happens is everybody just lifts weights and stuff. But in tennis, you just play tennis. Well, it's really strange because every day you play tennis, and most days you play tennis with 2 or 3 times a day. That's what you do. And what's interesting is every time you play tennis, you have to decide, who am I going to play? And what I realized every time I decided I was going to play tennis, I had to decide, is this an ego day or is this a skills day? And if it's an ego day, do you know who I'd play? People that were worse than me, people that I could beat. Now, it never helped my skills. As a matter of fact, if you play people worse than you, your skills start to deteriorate. But your ego is really maintained because you beat them. But you have other days you want to improve your skills. And you know what you're going to have to play then? People who are better than you. And the problem with paying people better than you, you're going to have to swallow your ego because they're going to beat you. And I want you to think about in your organization, which teachers try to hang around outstanding teachers? Outstanding teachers. Because every day for them is a skills day. And see, we don't work on our skills and ego at the same time. They have to trade off. But do you know the real way to build your ego is build your skills? Because eventually, as you get better, your skills go with it. I mean, your ego goes with that. And we've got to help people understand. Instead, what happens is people tend to hang around with people who have about the same skill set they have because they want the same excuse set they have. Great people hang around great people because they don't want excuses, they want solutions. Average people hang around average people because some days they want excuses and some days they want solutions. And ineffective people hang around ineffective people because they live their life in the blame frame. And we've got to help get people out of the blame frame, because what happens is great people look at the world differently than other people. And we've got to teach our people how to look at the world in the way exceptional people do, or there's no chance they can ever become exceptional. Okay. So let's take a look at a couple things here. One thing is the very first day y'all went virtual. The very first day y'all went virtual. A great teacher turns on his or her computer. Okay. A great teacher turns on his or her computer the very first day you went virtual. They have 25 kids in class and 11 kids show up, which might have been a kind ratio. Okay. But the very first day y'all went virtual, the great teacher has 25 kids in class and 11 kids show up. That could be a kind ratio. It may have been less than that, but this is a hypothetical. The very first day the great teacher turns on his or her computer, they have 11 kids show up. Put in the chat box, and you can abbreviate in any way you want to. Put in the chat box, what was a great teacher's first goal? The very first day of the pandemic with the very first class, they have 25 kids in class and 11 kids show up. What's a great teacher's first goal? Put it in the chat box if you could, please. Make connections, check with them, see how they're doing. relationships, check in, find out how they're doing, make sure they're okay, check in the kids, be glad they're there. You know what a great teacher's first goal is? Make sure it never gets to 10. Their first goal is make sure it never gets to 10. Because you know what they know? I got 11 kids. All I know is I have 11 kids right now. I don't know anything about the other 14. And I'm going to treat those 11 with such respect and dignity that for sure those 11 are going to come back. And if I'm really good, I may have 11 young ladies and gentlemen salespeople that are going to help influence the other 14. Great people always focus on what they can influence. Ineffective people always focus on what they can blame. It's a huge difference there. The ineffective people, what did they talk about that day? And what do they still talk about almost 3 years later? Put that in the chat box. What did they talk about that day? And what do they talk about almost 3 years later? The kids who don't show up. That's what they talk about. What can I do? I only have 11 kids. That's not my fault. After a week, I was down to 6. You can't blame me. And you know what's interesting is you knew which teachers it was going to be were like that because the teachers are always like that. Got a question for you. After you came back from Christmas vacation, how many of you had at least one person, at least one, that when you said, how was your holiday, you knew they were going to say something negative? Isn't that amazing? You go, how was your holiday? How was your vacation? And they go, stomach flu, coming out of both ends. I'm like, oh my gosh. Anyhow, how many of you know people like that? Because they do it all the time. I talked to somebody the other day. I go, how was your holiday? You know what they told me? Southwest Airlines canceled so many flights. I go, where did you get stranded? And they go, I didn't take any of them. I just read it. You know, I mean, it's like, who are you? How many of you know at least one person that posts gas prices on Facebook? I mean, I'm just asking questions here. What a loser. Think about it. And they don't just post it because they're mad. They post it because they want you mad. They're not doing it for information, or they'd keep posting gas prices. But isn't it weird they quit posting gas prices? It's people who are angry at the world. And the problem is we live and work with some of those people. And I want you to think about how parallel the relationships are between being virtual and being in person. You all know at the secondary level, especially for my middle school, junior high, high school people, your kids have multiple teachers. And you know, at the end of the first day of the pandemic, the very first day they were texting each other and they were going through their schedule. Isn't that exactly what they were doing? Even the kids that don't have technology have cell phones, which is weird. But anyhow, what's strange is they're going through their schedule. And you know what they're saying? First hour was stupid. And you know what the other kids are saying? Yeah, it's been stupid all year. And they're going, second hour was boring. You know what the kids are saying? Yeah, but it's been boring all year. And that the kids are going, third hour was special. And you know what the kids are saying? I know, and it's been special all year. We've got to remember that and how that carries over. It's so important. Quick, I got a couple questions here for you on that chat box. If you could put, how many of y'all are familiar with flexible seating? Big trend in education. Put that in the chat box if you could, please. First of all, I appreciate all the good-looking people turning their cameras on, and I appreciate the others leaving them off. So anyhow, how many of y'all are familiar with flexible seating? Okay. How many of you can name at least one outstanding teacher that would be outstanding using flexible seating? Give me a Y or an N. Okay. How many of you can name at least one outstanding teacher that would be outstanding not using flexible seating? Give me a Y or an N. How many of you can name at least one ineffective teacher that would be ineffective using flexible seating? Give me a Y or an N. And how many of you can name at least one ineffective teacher that would be ineffective not using flexible seating? Give me a Y or an N. What is not the variable? See if you can get that question. It's going to be more than a Y and N. What is not the variable? Flexible seating. Now, let's get this one. What is always the variable? The teacher. We have to be aware of that. You know, it's really funny. I've written several books on school culture, and you know why I was hesitant? Because I didn't want ineffective people to use culture as an excuse. You know what? It's interesting. It really isn't the culture. It's really the leader. I'm letting you in on a little secret here. It isn't the culture. It's the leader. Okay. You know, it's really interesting. And I know you're thinking, no, it's the culture. No, it's the leader. And if we talk about culture, everything talks about culture, but it's the leader. Okay. We were talking about sports here a little while ago. Nick Saban at the Alabama. You know what's really weird? They talk about culture all the time in Alabama. The culture. But they only talked about it since Nick Saban got there. Before he got there, they never talked about culture, which they had a culture too. They talk about Nick Saban. They talk about the culture. I work at University of Missouri. I like our football coach, Eli Drinkwitz. Other people don't like him. I like him a lot. He's really smart. Whether he can be successful or not, I don't know, but I really like him. Okay, culture takes 3 to 5 to 7 years. Culture. I got a question for you. If Nick Saban moved to Missouri and Eli Drinkwitz moved to Alabama, what would they be talking about in Missouri in about a week? Culture. It isn't the culture, it's the leader. If it was the culture, then when Eli Drinkwitz goes there, Alabama would keep winning and Missouri wouldn't win. But instead, it's going to switch because it really is leadership. And we cannot lose sight of that. Does that make any sense? And that's so important to keep in mind. The great leaders think just like the great teachers do. Now, understand, I'm not an opponent of flexible seating. I'm not a proponent of flexible seating. I don't care, because you know what I know? It doesn't make any difference. You want to change the culture of Mizzou football? Get Patrick Mahomes as quarterback. That would change the culture of Mizzou football immediately. See, it is people, it's not programs. We just get confused. And in some ways, people hope it's culture. They're going, nothing I can do because of the culture. I can't do this because of the culture. That's what ineffective people hide behind. It's funny, I've written a couple books with my girls, and my girls wrote in one of them, for teachers, if you have trouble managing your class, if you have trouble being motivated going to work, if you have trouble getting along with parents, run in the bathroom and look in the mirror. It's not the last place you look, but it's always the first place you look. I was in Colorado the other day and I tweeted, I said, the difficulty of the peak often has more to do with the attitude of the climber than the altitude of the mountain. And that's so important. And that's why leadership is so important, because we carry it with us. One other thing I did right before the pandemic, but if I have a teacher who's juiced up about flexible seating, I'll support them doing flexible seating. Because if they're more excited about teaching, the kids are going to be more excited about learning. I'm constantly supporting teachers on things they want to do, because if that brings them energy and enthusiasm, it's going to carry over to their students. But I also don't jam down the throat of a highly effective teacher flexible seating. Because if they're less excited about teaching, the kids are going to be less excited about learning. Does that make any sense? Give you another example here involving principals. I was in Mississippi talking to about 3,000 principals. And one of the things I like to do when I talk to a group, I love to glad hand. If any of you have been around with me, especially pre-pandemic, I love to glad hand, go around and interact with the group. But the reason I interact with the group is what I'm doing is I'm trying to find out who the best people are. Because I don't know if y'all knew this or not, you can't learn how to be great from average people, because average people don't know how to be great. You're thinking your average people are just holding back on it? No, I promise they do not know how to be great. If they knew how to be great, they'd be great. And I'm looking for the best people, because I've learned it's easier to find someone great and steal ideas than think of them yourself. So I'm going around the room meeting, and I found a table of 4 people. They were 4 people like you. They were smart people like you. They were not quite as attractive, but they were smart people like you. And I remember talking to them, and I thought one of these 4 principals has to be the best principal in the state of Mississippi. Just has to be, because it was a sharp group. And I finally figured it out, and I go, it's this lady right here. And the day was on leading school change. I am not a book salesman. I don't care if you buy a book. I don't care if you buy one book, Xerox it, and send it back. Do you know why I write books? So you know what to do. That's the only reason I write books, so you know what to do. And if you'll notice, my books are specific. And you know why? Because I want you to specifically know what to do. It was funny. Somebody just asked me about this recently, about the book Dealing with Difficult Parents, which was my 3rd book. And they go, Todd, why is it so specific? And I said, so you know what to do. You know what most people do while they approach stuff like difficult people? They talk about stuff like this. Mirror their body language. Listen first. I always go, even the stupid people know to do that. They don't even do it, but the stupid people know to do it. You know what we don't know? Do we call mom? Do we call dad? Do we call home? Do we call work? What do we do if they cuss at us? What if they do if they accuse us of being racist? What do they do if they accuse us of lying? What do we do if they're lying? What do we do if their kid's lying? What do we do if, when we're talking on the phone with them, kids in the background screaming and yelling, they don't even tell their kid to be quiet? When they come in, where do we sit? What if they bring a neighbor? What if they bring an attorney? What if they bring an advocate? What if they email us instead of calling us? How do we deal with all those things? That's the hard part. It's funny, and I know you all used to do this too. I know you all currently do this. When I had new teachers, I would always save half a dozen challenging parent phone calls. And I would get all the new teachers in, and they'd listen to me call all the challenging parents. They didn't go perfect, mainly because I'm dealing with people. But understand, you know what they got to hear? Every phone call always has exactly the same stem. I start every phone call exactly the same. Every phone call is professional. I don't care if it's your cousin, they go to church with you, or it's your best friend or your neighbor. We don't call people and have an emotional connection to it in terms of this. We don't call people and go, good news, good news, good news, because then they're upset when you don't call and go, good news, and you don't call and go, bad news. Instead, everyone has the same stem, and I taught my teachers a stem. Hi, this is Todd Whitaker. I'm Kevin's math teacher. I'm sorry to bother you at work, and I was wondering if I could get your help with something. And whatever it is, it's that same stem all the time. Anyhow, and they'd hear me do that. You know what else they'd hear? I never get rattled. I never get flustered. No matter what the people do, I never get rattled or flustered. You know what else they got to hear? How I defend my teachers. I wanted them to hear how I defend my teachers. I wanted them to know how I protect my school. The other thing they got to hear is if the parent and I have a dispute, one of the things I always do is called focus on the future. I don't want to continue talking about something we disagree about. Instead, what I focus on the future, meaning, what do we do so this doesn't happen again? How can we make sure that this doesn't occur again? Because we both agree on we don't want it to happen again. Does that make any sense? Whatever happened, we both don't want it to happen again. They also got to hear how I end every phone call professionally, regardless of what the person on the other end's doing. But there was one more thing that was really important to me. Sometimes when I got off the phone call with a challenging parent, do you know what I told the teacher? You know what I told my new teachers? That parent's whacked. And you know why I told them that parent's whacked? Because that's parents whacked. And if they don't know that parent's whacked, they start to think they're whacked. The other thing that was also helpful, they got to see how lucky they are to have the kids they have, because the kids are way better than the parents. And they didn't remember that. They didn't realize that. You know how much empathy that gives you toward a challenging kid once you meet their parent? You're going, holy mackerel, this must be the miracle child. I didn't know any way they could be like this. But they also got to hear, even when I said the parents whacked, I'm always professional, I'm always kind, I'm always polite, I'm always respectful, because guess what I need them to carry in the classroom? The exact same thing, regardless of the student. Anyhow, the book was on leading school change, and I asked the great principal in Mississippi, what's a goal you have you'd like to change? She said, my goal is every kid to leave home excited about learning. Give me a Y or an N in the chat box. What do y'all think of that goal? Is that a good goal? Every kid leave home excited about learning. I tear up when I hear that. Oh, that's just beautiful. Every kid leave home excited about learning. I told the principal I got bad news. She goes, what's that? And I said, that's not a goal, that's a wish. She goes, I don't understand. I said, you know what a goal is? Something you can influence. You know what a wish is? Something you need pixie dust to influence. See, that's not a goal, that's a wish. She goes, I don't understand. I said, are you married? She said, yes. I go, let me tell you the difference between a goal and a wish. A goal is you'd like to lose 10 pounds. A wish is you'd like your spouse to lose 10 pounds. See, that's the difference between a goal and a wish right there. One of them you can influence, and one of them you need pixie dust to influence. She goes, I still don't understand. I go, how do kids walk into your best teacher's classroom? You know what she said? They are excited about learning. I said, how did they leave home? She said, I don't have the slightest idea. I said, how do they walk into your worst teacher's classroom? She goes, not very excited about learning. I said, how do they leave home? And she said, I don't have any idea. Do y'all see the difference between a goal and a wish? A goal is something you can influence. A wish is something you need pixie dust to influence. Who doesn't want kids to be excited about learning when they leave home? But you know that has a lot more to do with home than it has to do with school. But how the kids walk in the classroom has a lot more to do with school than it does in home. Does that make any sense? Teach your teachers that. One other example, willingness to accept responsibility. Please teach your teachers these things. The people that can figure it out on their own have already figured it out on their own. You know, it's interesting. Great principals and average principals are very different. Great principals understand their role is to teach the teachers. Average principals think their role is to teach the students. You know the problem with teaching all the students? A bunch of them are gone the next year. What a waste of time that was. You know the problem if you don't teach your teachers? A bunch of them aren't gone the next year. In the chat box, give me a Y or an N. How many of you could predict which teacher will send the most kids to the office in the 2027-2028 school year? Give me a Y or an N. And you don't even have the rosters made up, do you? Because who's the variable? The teacher. And in a school, guess who the variable is? The principal. You ask a great principal, who's responsible for the climate of your school? Do you know what great principals say? Put that in the chat box. You ask a great principal, who's responsible for the climate of your school? Guess what great principals say? I am. I am. I am. You ask a poor principal, who's responsible for the climate of your school? Do you know what they say? The teachers are, the kids are, the culture, central office, Miley Cyrus. You know, I mean, it's just unbelievable in terms of what they say there. Isn't Miley Cyrus a Kentucky person? Yeah, that's why I put Party in the USA in there. I thought, isn't she a Kentucky person? No, yes. Does anyone know who Miley Cyrus is? Do I need to go back to Hannah Montana so that you can understand? Is that where we're at there? Do we understand? Okay, good. Okay, am I on? Am I even on? I can't tell here. So anyhow, so how important that is. Teacher teaches this. Here's what I teach my teachers. A great teacher gives a quiz, a test, or a homework assignment, and the kids do poorly on it. And doesn't that happen to every teacher? Doesn't that happen to everybody? The best teacher gives a quiz or a test or a homework assignment, and the kids do poorly on it. I mean, isn't that amazing? How many of you have ever had a time where you had the most beautiful lesson you've ever had? At the end of the day, you paused and reflected on it, and you began to tear up. And the next day you bring it up, and the kids go, what? We've never talked about that. Hasn't that happened to everybody? The best teacher gives a quiz or a test or a homework assignment, and the kids do poorly on it. Who do they blame? Put that in the chat box. Who does the best teacher blame? Themselves. That's why you're so good. The worst teacher gives a quiz or a test or a homework assignment, and the kids do poorly on it. And the kids doing poorly is not the variable. The response to the kids doing poorly is the variable. The worst teacher gives a quiz or a test or a homework assignment, and the kids do poorly on it. Who do they blame? The kids, last year's teachers, hip hop music, cable TV, the Wildcat struggles at guard. I mean, they blame all of those things, don't they? And that's so important in terms of that dynamic, willingness to accept responsibility. Okay, we just have a little bit of time here. I'm going to share with you a couple of things here if I can find there we go. Great. Okay, I'm going to share with you a couple of things here that great people do differently. I just wanted to check the timeline because I'm completely an idiot. Okay, perfect. Okay, remember, it is people, it's not programs. Okay, it's always going to be people, it's never going to be programs, and that's just the way it is. Okay, one thing we want to remind ourselves, and we're going to teach our teachers this. You are the filter. Do you know what you are the filter means? You're the filter. That means you're in charge of what comes out of your mouth and what doesn't. You're the filter. When people say, how's your day going? Did you know you have a choice in how to respond? I didn't know if y'all knew that or not. You have a choice in how to respond. People say, how's your day going? Do you know what I say? Great. You know why I say great? I'm not a false positive guy. Do you know why I say great? Because it doesn't help us not to. That's it. It doesn't help us not to. You're a principal. You got a troubled parent, Mrs. Smith, in your office. You could not get her out of your office. She is a jackknob. You know what I mean here. You can't not get her out of your office. Finally get a crowbar and you wedge her out of your office. You walk out in the hallway and you go, hey, how's your day going? Our teacher says, hey, how's your day going? You know what we say? Great. How are you? How does that help anybody for me to go, oh, that Mrs. Smith, that Mrs. Smith? Every teacher who has a kid named Smith is now scared to death. Every teacher who has a kid named Smythe is now scared to death. Every teacher who has a kid who has a step parent, and they don't know the step parent's last name, is now scared to death just in case there's any chance the step parent's last name is Smith. When the principal sneezes, the whole school catches a cold. When a teacher sneezes, the whole class catches a cold. It's up to us, and that's so important. Okay, I got a math problem for you. Do we got any math teachers here? Anybody former math teachers? I love math. What, there's three kinds of people in this world, those who love math and those who don't. Anyhow, that's a math joke for non-math teachers there. So I got a math problem for you here. Great teacher has 25 students. You're going to teach your teachers this. Great principals teach their teachers. Average principals teach the students. Great teachers, a great teacher has 25 students in his or her class. The great teacher is in a bad mood. Great teacher has 25 students in their class. The great teacher is in a bad mood. How many people in the classroom know it? The answer is a number. Put it in the chat box, please. A great teacher has 25 students. A great teacher's in a bad mood. How many people will know it? 0, 0, 0 is wrong. 25 is wrong. 0 is wrong. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 is wrong. 1. Finally, someone got it. Nice work. Copy off the smart people. Don't copy off the dumb people. 1. And who's the one? The teacher. And you know what the great teacher does? Filters it out from everybody else. A negative teacher's in a bad mood. How many people in the school know it? Everyone. And not because you notice, it's because they announce it. How many of you work with at least one person that uses their mood as a weapon? You ever seen a teacher walk into class and go, class, do not try me today. Do not try me today. I'm in a bad mood. I said I'm in a bad mood. It's amazing. I got a question for you. Y or an N? How many of you in your schools have emotionally reserved parking places? Or emotionally reserved seating for the teachers in the teachers' lounge, faculty meetings. Faculty meetings, do any of you have a group of negative people that sit together in the back near the door? There's no way I can know this. I'm rolling the dice and taking a chance. How many have emotionally reserved parking places? Can I tell you a secret? We only emotionally reserve things for negative people because negative people are the only ones that throw fits. Normal people don't throw fits. My elementary friends here, your normal kindergarten kids don't throw fits, the normal ones. And we have adults that throw fits because someone has parked in their parking place. Being in their classroom must be like a double-decker pleasure bus. I mean, that has got to be so fun to be around people like this. Now, I want you to think about this. Teacher teaches this, please. These are faculty meetings. Teacher teaches this. If somebody parks in a normal teacher's parking place, not great, not crummy teacher, normal teacher's parking place, what does the normal teacher do? Put it in the chat box. What does the normal teacher do? Park somewhere else. And who do they tell? Nobody. Normal people tell nobody. How many of you have at least 3 teachers that would be breaking news to? I'm asking questions here. Normal people tell nobody. A negative teacher, somebody parks in their parking place. Who do they tell? Everybody. And you know what I teach my teachers? That's why people hate them. Because it is no fun to be around someone like that. It is no fun to be somebody who carries the negative message. And the thing as a leader, you have to understand, you're never going to appease the negative people. But the challenge is if you try to appease the negative people, you lose the good people. And the only people that move your school forward are the highly effective people. Nobody else moves the school forward. Most other people don't even want the school to move forward. And please keep something in mind. It's so interesting. They talk about people are resistant to change. In general, people aren't resistant to change. They're resistant to improvement. If they could do less, they'd do less. It isn't the change. It's that dang improvement that seems to be bothersome to them. Anybody ever work with a negative person that threatens to quit and people talk them out of it? Is that the weirdest thing you've ever heard? Somebody crummy threatens to quit and people, they go, don't quit, don't quit. I go, what? They're horrible. They're so bad. I call them 2-partiers. They're so bad that if they left, you'd throw 2 parties, one for them and one for you. I mean, isn't that amazing? And here's what negative people threaten to do all the time. I want you to think about this. What do negative people threaten to do all the time? May not be true in Kentucky. It was true in Idaho. I was recently there, but I wasn't in the skinny part. So anyhow, here's what negative people threaten to do. You know what? I might just quit and go become a greeter at Walmart. And you know what I always tell them? There's no way. They will never hire you. Their standards are low, but they're not that low. You're thinking of their standards for customers. Walmart has no standards for customers. You ever question that? Just Google, what do Walmart customers wear? You look at those pictures and you know what comes to mind? Apparently fishnets back. You know, I never knew it went out of style. You ought to see my tan. But teaching your teachers this, I promise you this, they want to be good. I promise they want to be good. And if you ever question it, my breakout's on how to get all teachers to be like the best teachers, because in my mind, that's the only solution. In every school in Kentucky, you have at least one teacher that's cracked the Da Vinci Code. We don't need to innovate, we need to replicate. And it's a lot easier to replicate than it is innovate. Does that make any sense? If all your teachers became like your best teachers, point to the person whose job would become easier in the school. Point to your favorite person in the school. Who is that, right? That's you. And what happens is we always are working on our ineffective people, and we need to be working on our effective people. And I don't avoid ineffective people. My first book was dealing with difficult teachers because I was a middle school principal, and you can't hide a crummy teacher at a middle school because every day the kids are on the hunt for weakness. You know, I mean, that's what they're doing in a middle school. They are on the hunt for weakness. But here's the standard for dealing with your challenging people. You always deal with a negative person with the mindset that all the other teachers are watching. Because the other teachers want you to deal with them. They just want you to deal with them in a professional and respectful manner. Does that make any sense? The person who's dysfunctional is the least important person in the school. Quit making them out to be the most important person in the school. I do a lot with classroom management. I'm going to talk about that in the breakout. If anybody wants to come and nobody wants to come, great, I'm off. So anyhow, what's interesting is I have to teach my teachers this. The kid who misbehaves is the least important student in the classroom during the time they're behaving. Quit making them out to be the most important student in the classroom. Nobody defends teachers like me. Nobody defends teachers like me. I could do an entire day workshop on that. How to defend your teachers in a way that you're heroes and you don't lose any of the parents. Actually, you gain respect from the parents and you gain respect from the teachers, which is great, but you got to do it right. Well, anyhow, what's interesting is if a kid gets sent to the office, I had to teach my last school had 1,350 middle school kids. I had to teach my 2 assistants that the kid who gets sent to the office is the least important student in the school. Quit making them out to be the most important student in the school. Nobody defends teachers like me, but I'm not in a hurry. Do you know why I'm not in a hurry to deal with that kid? Because I don't have a teacher in the school in a hurry to get them back. And if your secretary's any good, they can deal with 2 dysfunctional kids better than your 2 worst teachers can deal with 2 dysfunctional kids. Don't punish the 1,349 kids for doing right by not being around them to spend time with a kid doing wrong. Don't be in a hurry to do that. Think about the best teacher. If they have 24 kids engaged and 1 kid not engaged, you know what their biggest fear is? Getting to 23, 22, 21, 20. They keep those kids engaged, then they figure out what to do with the other one. Does this make any sense? I know we're out of time. I'm going to mention one last thing here. Just one last thing. I want you to always think of this perspective. I want you to do me one favor between now and the end of the school year. One favor. I want you to go into the best teacher's classroom when they need it. Not when you need it, when they need it. Now, you both may need it at the same time. You ever had a Tuesday that was the longest month of the year? I mean, understand this. So, but I want you to go into the best teacher's classroom when they need it. When they need it. And I want you to leave one note. I want you to leave this note. I was sitting down in the office and I forgot what school was. And I wanted to come into your classroom so that I could remember what school was. Thanks for being here for all the students. And thanks for being here for me. How many of you have never received a note that nice in your life and you married someone? You have to make people feel special so that they act special. What's the quote of the student? My teacher thought I was smarter than I was, so I was. In a great teacher's classroom, every student thinks they're the favorite. Every student thinks they're the favorite. Somebody asked me on Twitter the other day, they go, Todd, how do I take care? They go, how does a principal take care of the students? And I said, I don't have any idea. All I know is how a principal takes care of the teachers. And then I know how the teachers take care of the students. Folks, they are your school. Those teachers are your school. And make sure they feel special, make sure they feel important, and make sure they feel valued every day. And one thing I put in the last edition of What Great Principals Do Differently, leadership is not an event. It is what we do every day. It's funny, if you want to change the culture, you have to change the climate. But you know what's amazing? If you change today, you change the climate. If you never change back, you change the culture. If today at your school, everyone was respectful to students, that may change the climate. And if everyone keeps being respectful to students, there's nothing that changes the culture more than that. You start with your teachers, then your teachers work with the students, okay? Todd Whitaker's nobody. If I can ever help you, give me a holler. My website's toddwhitaker.com. I don't have any people. On Twitter, I'm at Todd Whitaker, and I hope to be able to connect and continue conversations on Twitter. But if I can ever help you, give me a holler. I talk to people every day. Yesterday, I presented and I talked to 6 people on the way home, just because sometimes our jobs are lonely. Same way in the classroom. I say it's the most amazing thing. Teaching is the most isolated profession, and you're never alone. Okay? Thank you for showing the world how to lead. Thank you for making a difference. It really is what people like you do differently, because what you do is different than what other people do. Thank you so much for being a part of this and being a part of Kentucky Ed. I love Kentucky. I'm so honored to have a chance to connect with you anytime I get a crack. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd Whitaker. Everybody, let's do the sign language. Give a clap. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
One person saying I'm number 1. What does that mean? I don't know what that means in Kentucky. Okay.
All right. For those who are good to go, the breakout rooms are open. You can go ahead and head that way. If you wouldn't care, make sure that you have changed your screen name. Hover over your picture and you'll see 3 little dots. You can rename your screen name, your first and last name. That will be great for us for keeping track of who is here today. And it's time for the first breakout room. So head that way. If you need any help, stay here in this main room. I'll be glad to answer any questions. But the breakout room hosts are headed to the breakout rooms and the presenters should be headed that way too. So choose where you would like to go. Here's the grid, just in case you don't have the link. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, do we want to send a message to remind hosts to record?
Yes. Host, please record, and I'll send that to the break. You can send it to the breakout. Can you send that? Do you have, as co-host, do you have a capability to send that? I need to stop my recording too.
Hey,